Number 1. The Hitchhiker. Whenever I begin telling anyone the story, I know that they will likely roll their eyes just when they hear the name of it. Yeah, it seems like every hitchhiker story I ever hear is a bad one, and there have been more than enough stories to indicate that hitchhiking is a bad idea. Although I've never hitchhiked myself, I have picked somebody up once, and I'll never do it again. I was on my way to my parents' house for winter break. I was a sophomore in college, and I lived in a different state than my parents. I had a nice old car, the sort of car you tend to know has to be owned by a poor student. But it had a good solid motor on it, and I knew it would be more than enough to get me home. The drive was a 2-day drive, and went through the Smoky Mountains. I remember coming up on the mountains. If you've never seen them before, I hope that you will be able to eventually. However, it can take a long time to get through them. As I was driving through, I was surprised by the lack of cars on the road. I figured lots of students were having to drive home for the holidays. But I soon discovered that maybe the reason there weren't many cars on the road was because the other drivers checked the weather in the mountains that day. The clouds moved in fast, and before I knew it, they had blotted out the sun. But then, the snow began to fall. And it didn't even start with a few flurries here and there. It began snowing, and it snowed hard immediately. Within 20 minutes, my visibility was completely gone, and I was driving very slow. I had been driving pretty slowly and carefully, and the road I was on eventually narrowed down to one lane on each side. I wasn't used to driving in the snow, and it was a very nerve-wracking experience. That was when I saw someone trudging through the snow on the side of the road. I came upon him really quickly, and was fortunate not to hit him. I had never picked up a hitchhiker before, as I had mentioned earlier. I'd never even considered it. And technically, he wasn't hitchhiking. Seeing that man struggling in the fierce snow, I immediately decided I needed to pull over and offer him a ride. He accepted and got into the passenger seat of the car. There are horror tropes right here. The man was not immediately creepy or anything. He wasn't silent or morose. He was just an older guy than me, in his 30s, and he was pretty friendly right off the bat. I was feeling quite proud of myself, too, for helping this man out. It was definitely my good deed of the year. He asked me if I could give him a ride to a specific area, telling me how I would be able to get there. It was very far out of my way, and I wasn't really willing to go around in an area I didn't know, in the middle of a snowstorm, away from the main roads. I let him know I was trying to get home to my parents. I could take him as far as he needed to go on this road, but I really didn't want to get off track. That was when everything changed. The man sat back in his seat and asked again. He told me that it would be really helpful if I could do this for him. He wasn't asking me either. He was telling me. And for the first point in this encounter, I began to feel very nervous. I told the man quite plainly that I couldn't take him that far out of my way. I wish that I could, but I just can't get that far off track. I even apologized, which in retrospect seems weird, since I was the one doing him a favor. I mentioned before that the man had sat back in the seat a moment before. He took his right boot, and he pulled it up, putting it on the seat. He reached onto his boot, and he pulled something out, and I nearly steered off the road when I saw the large hunting knife that he had unsheathed. He held it upside down, and took the blade and stabbed into my dashboard, embedding the blade there by about an inch. He didn't talk for a few miles. He just sat there and looked forward. We drove in silence, and it remained that way for close to 10 minutes. I had to keep my eyes on the road, but I also felt I had to keep them on the knife, too. I was scared, more than I can tell anyone. Eventually he talked again. He told me to make a right turn. I didn't answer him, but I did make the turn down the road. He had me make a few more turns, and We eventually had gotten over 45 minutes off the main road. He directed me to an old trailer, and I pulled up into it. And once we stopped, the man grabbed his knife and pulled it out of the dash. He simply gave me a smirk and thanked me for the ride before getting out and closing the door. The moment he was out, I just took off. To hell with the snow. I needed to get as far from that man as possible. I tried my best to remember the way back to the main road, and it took me a long time, but I eventually made it. From there, I made it home safely, if just a little bit late. So yeah, there is a reason why you never hear good hitchhiking stories. It's the scary ones that people remember. Number 2. The Thanksgiving. I moved out of my parents' house right when I turned 18 and graduated. I had been wanting my own space for a long time and could finally get it. I worked at Submarine Sam's shop, and on that sort of salary, I could only afford a really small studio apartment. It's weird, because I know I don't want to live like that again, but I actually have fond memories of it. When you're poor, if you make the most of what you have, you can be extremely happy. My first Thanksgiving, I was alone. I volunteered to work. Business was slow, as was to be expected. But it was not only because it was Thanksgiving, it was also because a pretty fierce snowstorm was on the way. My manager chose to close the store early and let us go home early. It was snowing pretty hard. By the time I got back to my place, it was dark too. I got inside, put my Jenny-O turkey loaf in the toaster oven, and went to watch TV while it cooked. Those are the little things I remember and miss, making the most out of a little bit. Once I got my entire meal made, I turned on the television and prepared to watch a TV show while I ate my dinner. I always liked to watch TV with the lights off, so I turned them off and sat down. A quick look out the window revealed that the snow was still coming down very heavily. This would likely be one of those nights when every car in the parking lot would be completely covered with snow. My window looked out over the parking lot, and I sometimes really liked watching the snow fall in front of a street lamp. I didn't want to watch it too long because I wanted to eat my dinner. Right before I sat down, I noticed a man trudging through the snow. Nothing odd, of course. People walked around here quite a bit. I ate my meal and watched the show. I was going to go into the kitchen for a second helping when I glanced out the window again. I noticed the man from earlier still trudging through the snow. This time, I saw him dragging a chest across the snow. It was odd. It was just a normal chest, like something you would buy from Walmart or something, and he was dragging it through the deep snow, holding it up by one end. It just seemed so odd to me that not only was he doing this on Thanksgiving, but in the middle of a really harsh snowstorm. I watched him as he dragged the chest over to the dumpsters. He put it by them, and then made his way back to wherever he had come from. Now, human nature is one thing. We don't like to have a mystery about something. And although I tried to keep my mind from thinking about it, I kept wondering what was in that trunk. I knew it was likely something boring, like broken dishes or old pipes or something, but I began wondering if it wasn't possibly something more interesting. After a while, I finally realized I would not stop thinking about it. I had to know what was in that trunk. I waited a while and kept checking out the window to make sure the man was not making another trip back to the dumpster. When I finally felt comfortable that he was not coming back, I put on my coat and snuck out my back door. It was weird that I felt like I had to sneak, because I had every right to go out to the dumpsters no matter what. But I, for some reason, felt like it would be bad if I had gotten caught. When I made it to the dumpsters, the chest was where the man had left it. It was locked, but it was obviously a really cheap lock that I could break. I found a brick, and after a few really hard hits on the lock, it broke. It opened, and I lifted the lid. Even before the lid was open, I smelled the most rancid and disgusting smell I'd ever smelled in my life. It was vile, but I still opened the chest further, and when I knew what was in there, I was sorry I'd ever seen the man out there. The chest was full of dead squirrels. I mean, tons of dead and decayed squirrels. I immediately slammed the lid down and vomited on the ground, and then, after I got my wits back, I left, went back to my house and showered. Still, I didn't feel clean for a long time after that. Apparently, the garbage men didn't take the chest either, and the manager of the apartment building found out about the chest. I described the man to him, but it wasn't someone who was a tenant there. They apparently had just used our dumpsters to get rid of it. I had never before and never since seen something so remarkably sickening, and I hope I never do again. Number 3. The Ride. The bus system in the area I lived in my early 30s, was really not great. No buses ran after 6 p.m., and there were only a few during the day, since I didn't live in an area in the county that needed buses more often. This was occasionally an issue because I worked in a fast food restaurant about 5 miles away from my apartment. I didn't have a car, but for the most part, my work hours were during times when the buses ran. But at least 2 times a week, I had to work a closing shift, and when that happened, I would have to walk home after work. Honestly, I did not mind the walk most of the time, especially when the weather was nicer. Every once in a while, it wasn't. Sometimes a car would pull over and ask me if I needed a ride. I didn't really like getting into a stranger's car, though. There were a few times when I was so tired, or the weather was so bad, that I reluctantly accepted the ride. But for the most part, when that happened, I would always be fine with a person giving me the ride. I was never picked up by anyone who was creepy or anything. People would drive me through the bad weather to my apartment. I would thank them, and that would be it. I really don't want to give my age away, but I'll let you know this happened in the early 90s. It was a closing shift that I had to work, and I knew there was supposed to be a really bad snowstorm coming that evening. I was not looking forward to the walk home that awaited me after I got off work. The snow began falling very early in the day, and it began getting deeper and deeper. I kept watching as I worked, because we stopped getting customers. I kept hoping the snow would stop, but it didn't. In every moment I just feared more and more my eventual walk home. I'm sure some of you are wondering why a co-worker didn't offer me a ride home. It's a stupid reason, actually. In order for me to get the job, I had to have reliable transportation. So I never told them that I had to walk 5 miles occasionally. It seems silly to me now, looking back on that, and actually thinking that if the manager knew I walked a few days, thinking that he would actually fire me. I was one of the last people to leave the store that night. Everyone else drove off, slowly, through the deep snow. I waited until they were gone, and then I walked across the parking lot. It took only a few steps before my pants, my shoes, and my socks were totally soaked with wet snow. When I got up to the end of the shopping center, I noticed that there was a car coming through the lot. I thought maybe it was mall security or something like that, but it wasn't. The car pulled up by me, and one of the windows rolled down. A man in the car pointed his head out and asked me if I needed a ride. It wouldn't surprise anyone that I was at first thrilled. When I got a good look at the guy, I froze. There was something about him, and to this day I can't tell you what it was. He wasn't creepy looking, he didn't talk weird. He was driving a very nice luxury car. I had actually nothing to go on. But I had a strong feeling I should not get into that car. I declined the ride, telling him I liked the snow. It was just out for a casual walk. He laughed a little, and I know how unbelievable my story was. He insisted that nothing was wrong. He wasn't a creep. He didn't want anything from me. He just again was trying to do a good deed. Again, there was nothing creepy about him. He seemed sincere, but for some reason, I just couldn't bring myself to accept the ride. I declined again, and he asked me if I was sure. I told him that I was, and he told me to have a good night. He then took off out of the parking lot and then down the road. My walk was very difficult, and I kept thinking to myself that I should have accepted the ride, but I just went on. And this had to have been about 30 minutes later. As I was walking along the route to get home, I noticed some flashing lights, and as I got closer, I noticed the lights were coming from an ambulance and a couple police cars. When I was finally up at the commotion, I got the shock of my life when the car that was pulled over was the car of the guy who had offered me the ride. A quick look at the police car revealed the man sitting in the back seat, obviously under arrest. I simply made my way past it, although I did get approached by a cop. I told him I was just walking home from work and he let me go. The man didn't own the car. He had attacked the woman who did own it, and she was knocked out in the trunk when the guy tried to pick me up. She actually survived, for which I'm happy. But I was so damn happy, I did not accept that ride. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. I know it's been a while since my last video, and I hadn't intended on such a large amount of time passing. It has taken a lot to deal with what happened with my brother, and I honestly was having problems working. I feel a lot better now, so I'm going to be playing catch-up for the rest of the month. I want to thank everyone for the kind wishes they have sent me regarding what happened. It really did help quite a bit. Because I've mostly been off social media lately, and haven't had updates there, I'm sure some people may think that I'm slowing down or have lost interest in doing this. I just want to let everyone know that is not what is happening here. It's just a couple difficult weeks, but I have every intention on continuing to make these videos and interact as much as I can with you all. In the meantime, please give this video a like if you enjoyed it. You can subscribe using the button below and the bell notification, or by using the icon of Iniquez the cat that will appear at the end of the closing. Share it with someone you think might enjoy it, and leave me a comment to let me know what you thought. You can always follow Iniquez and myself on Facebook and Twitter using the links in the description. If you have a story that you like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, I only read original stories that have not been read on other YouTube channels. And if you have one, you can send it to the address included in the description. I'm a bit behind in my emails right now, but I promise to get caught up in the next day or two. And please, make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.